Hey guys, it's Kiara, and we'll start diving into Illustrator. So you can get Illustrator from Adobe, just over here, on creativeadobe.com. And you can get, for students, $19 a month, and you can also get the yearly pass. Although we are working with Adobe CC 2015, or at least I am, you don't exactly need the latest and greatest in versions. At the end of the day, we're just playing around with shapes and exporting them as vector files. You can have the Adobe CC, you can have the 2014 version, 2012, 2011. Either way, that will all still work. So don't huss and fuss all over too much around that. It'll still be able to work, even though the UI might look slightly different, the user interface. Everything else should work completely fine. So it doesn't matter what version you're at, you'll still be able to create the logos. So let's jump right in. So I already have Illustrator open, and I have this file already open, but let's just go quickly over how we would create a new file in Illustrator. So we can go to File, New, and here we can actually set up the actual preferences for our new document. So I can call it Test, and the width and height really doesn't matter because we can always change that once we actually create the document, and that just defines an arbitrary number of how long and how high this document is going to be. But once we create the logo, since we can infinitely zoom in and out, we can always resize this document later. It really doesn't matter. So that's all good. And the color mode. If you're planning to use this logo only for the web, Instagram, your website, and that's about it, RGB is the way to go. Just because you'll have a bit more colors to choose from. But if this logo is eventually going to go on business cards or menus, or anything that's pretty much printed in the real world, you're going to want CMYK, just because printers aren't compatible with RGB. They can't reach some of those high color limits, so you want to use CMYK. That's usually all good, and we'll click OK. And that's how you create a document. Easy and simple. Now, if your user interface, all these toolbars, all these menus, don't look like they do on my screen, that's just because you have to reset it to one of the default templates. So right now I'm on Essential, but we can go to Layout, we can go to Typography, and there's a bunch of different options we can choose from. Usually I'm on Essential, but this time I'm going to go with Layout. It's pretty clean. We pretty much see everything that we need to see. We have the layers over here, we have the colorful swatches, and we should be able to work from here. So I'm just going to expand my window just a bit higher, and we're good. So let's go back to our logo core, and it's all the way over here. And we're going to introduce Illustrator just by creating some shapes. And we're going to see how we can go along with that. So I'm going to quickly go to Essentials, just because with Layout we don't have the actual toolbar popping up on the top. So I'm just going to go to Essentials, and we have everything that we need for this demo. Sorry about that. So we have two squares here. And I'm just going to basically show you how we can actually go about creating this and, the basic tools of Illustrator. Pretty much everything that we need to know when using the software package. So over here, you'll find the layers. And all this means is that this is how Illustrator reads your files from top to bottom. And with the layer, it's basically like a folder with all of our objects, shapes, and colors inside of it. It's a method of organization. So we already have a new layer selected. We're going to give it a little eye over here. And I'm just going to delete this current thing. And we have these two. The number 1 is locked. That's what the layer is called, and it contains these two shapes. And right now it's locked because we don't want to be able to touch them. And same goes with the little watermark on the left-hand side. So on the top layer, we're going to try to recreate this image with some more bright colors and see if we can match it. So with all the tools in Illustrator, you'll have all the actual options to choose which tool you want to use on the left-hand side. From the pen tool to the shapes, you're pretty much going to always start from here. Once you actually create something using these tools, you're going to be able to modify them on the very top menu. And then if you want to do gradients or organize it or add a bit more nifty stuff into it, all those menus are on the right-hand side. So you're pretty much going in a clockwise direction when working. So let's go to the square, let's click and hold, and we see that we have a lot more options to choose from. So we have the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, and it goes on. And that actually works for pretty much any tool that we do. So if we click and hold, we'll see that we have a bunch of tools to choose from. And once you choose that tool, it's going to replace that little icon, that picture, with the tool you selected. So let's just start off with a shape tool. So I'm going to click and hold for the rectangle. We got the rectangle. I'm going to drag, click and hold a rectangle on the top one that we have. And this homework is available to download, so download it and follow along. So I'm just going to click and hold out a rectangle, and you'll see that those little green arrows pop up and down on the left hand side and the top hand side because we are overlapping it, and Illustrator is able to see that, and it kind of helps us out with these guides. If you don't see that, you see how these little green arrows pop up? Those lines? It just means that we're exactly overlapping on the previous shape that we made on Illustrator. So I'm just going to go back, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Draw out our little rectangle. Okay, perfect. And that's what we created. Now from here, you'll see that we didn't actually create a rectangle. We created some kind of weird stroke, not what we're going for. And this is our introduction to the fill and stroke. So the actual two rectangles that I had to start with was the fill and the stroke. That's what those icons mean. And you'll find them on the left hand side right here. So what the fill means is that if you're drawing on a circle or a rectangle, it defines what color the shape is on the inside. So a red circle, a blue square, it defines the actual property of that shape. The stroke, on the other hand, is showing the actual outline or the width stroke that goes around the shape. Usually you can have it just set at none, so no stroke. And you can also have no fill, but a 4 center stroke. So you can always mess around with those options right down here. And once you actually click on this object, you'll find all the options on the very top menu. So let's play around with it. So I'm going to go back to my eye tool so I can actually see it, that visibility. I'm going to go to my selection tool, this little black cursor. I'm going to click on the square I made right here. And we see that all these options popped up on the top. So right now it says that we don't have a fill, but we do have a stroke. And we do see that right now. So let's say that I didn't want to have a stroke right now. We have these 3 options on the bottom. One means that there's a color. That's the very left hand side. The very middle shows that we want a gradient, which we're not going to touch right now. And on the right hand side, it just means nothing. We want nothing in the slot. And in this case, we really don't want a stroke. So I'm just going to click this none, and that's it. It just removes the stroke automatically. But now we just have a square, and there's nothing inside and there's nothing around it. So we actually need to define that something needs to go inside the square. So I'm going to click on this fill, and you see how it swaps the actual positions, just so it shows what you're currently working on. I'm going to click solid color, and it's going to fill it automatically with a gray. But we don't really want a gray. I'm kind of feeling festy today, so I want kind of a brighter color. So I can go to the color menu, and I'm just going to sample a green. You can also go over here and sample a swatch. You can do blue, red, and these are just the pre-made swatches. I'm just going to do kind of orange. Orange seems fun. And that's that. So now I want to do the exact same thing for the other square, the actual stroke demonstration, and we want to put it behind the other one. So just because these squares are the same width and height, there's no need for me to make a whole different square. We're just going to click the square that we have right now, Command C, Command V, Control C, Control V, just because we're trying to copy and paste it. You can also go to Edit, Copy, and then Edit, Paste. And we're going to click and drag, and we're going to throw it right here. And again, you'll see these green arrows or lines pop up, being that we're exactly on the center point. And again, this is Illustrator being very friendly and trying to help us out. That way we're not trying to go pixel to pixel to see if the lines exactly match up. So this looks pretty good. But we don't want an orange in this case, just because I can't tell the difference. I want a slightly darker color. So now, instead of going to the swatches panel and trying to get a much darker tone, or in the color menu, I'm going to double click this fill, this little icon that we have, that's signifying the fill. And I'm going to choose something slightly darker, just by sliding this cursor a bit downwards. And this is just going to give us a darker value. And we see that this color is what we started off with, and this is what we have right now. And I'm going to click OK. And now we have a much darker orange, which is pretty good. But again, we don't want this fill. We don't even want to have a fill in this case. We actually want a stroke to have this. So instead of actually going back, selecting none for the fill, and then going to the stroke, selecting the color, and then darkening it, there's actually one more option that's I use fairly often, and it's just called the flip. And it's these two arrows right on the right hand side, and once we flip them, it's going to take the property of the stroke. It's just going to swap those properties. So we have this, but now the stroke is really, really thin. But because we already have the rectangle selected, we can go to the top menu and just start playing around with those values. So I'm just going to click on the stroke and just hit the upwards arrow just to get a higher and higher stroke value. But in this case, we're kind of going, the stroke is building on the outside and the inside. But because we have two squares of the same width and height, I kind of want them to have the same properties still. I don't want to change those properties. So I'm going to go on stroke, click on that button, and I'm going to make sure that the align strokes is on the inside. And again, we have these three options. You can play around with it. This one will do it on the inside, which is what we want. And this one will do it to the outside, which is a bit too large. So on the inside, we're going to have that perfectly lined up. And now we need to decrease our width. And just keep hitting it. And you'll see that it slowly matches up on 25. 25? Nope, 26. And that's that. But now we have one more problem. This stroke, this demo that we made, is in front of the actual fill, and we want to send it behind the other one. Now I mentioned how in layers we can actually swap the organization or the files. And if we go to layers and we open up this drop-down menu, we see that this stroke is in front of the fill, and we can click and drag this below. That works. But there's also another way we can do this without having to go in each time trying to find the layer, and especially if you have like 1,000 layers, it's going to be impossible to find. So we can click on the stroke, and we can do command, and we can use the brackets on the keyboard to send it in front or behind, in front or behind. And if you have a lot of objects, this is a really quick way to get objects in front, behind, and really match up the shadows, the highlights, and whatever objects you may have. You can do the exact same thing if you go up to Object, Arrange, and Bring to Front, Bring Forward, Send Backwards, Send to Back. And that's pretty much it. So we created these two squares, and now let's say we want to play around with it just a bit more properties with them. So this is where these two cursors come in. So the first one selects the entire object. So it doesn't select the actual points that make up the object, them being this little dot, this little dot, this little dot, and that little dot. This cursor just selects the entire object. It doesn't care that you're trying to select one particular point. While in this case, this selection selects individual points. Now, it can still select the entire object if you click the center of it. But let's say you click on the very corner, and you click and drag. We can actually modify this square to look slightly different. And we can modify this to go slanted, bring it inwards, make it a kind of a triangle, and that's pretty much that. So this gives us a bit more power to modify it however we may need. And I'm just going to bring it back to its original position. And that's that. But let's say in this case we want to modify the stroke. Well, the same principles apply. You can click and you can drag this out. No, didn't select the point. You can click and drag this out, and the stroke is going to follow along with it. And that's actually pretty much all there is to Illustrator. I'll be going into the Pathfinder and layers just a bit more in the next few lessons, but this is all Illustrator is. You're creating very basic shapes, modifying them, throwing in some fills, some strokes, and eventually you can build pretty much any simple shape like this. It's a very procedural way of building things, and it's not very complicated, and it's very easy to use. So once you actually have something you'd like, you can go up to File, Save As, and you can save it anywhere you'd like, and it's just going to save it as an AI file. And that's pretty much it. You can always open up this AI file in Photoshop, even though you won't be able to modify the points, or you can just open up in Illustrator at a later point, and you'll be able to modify these little points, but you won't be able to print it right away. If you want to print it and start saving it as a PNG for the web, you have to go to File, Save for Web, and here we can actually choose our options, and we can even choose a ridiculous number like 9,000 pixels by 9,000 pixels. let it load up for a bit. And if we zoom in, you'll see that, ooh, it's a really big document. You can see that Illustrator still retains its sharpness just because we're using the vector format. And we can click save, but I'm not doing that, so we're just going to click cancel. And that's it. That's pretty much the most complex parts about Illustrator. So hopefully you got a good grasp on that. Hope you got the homework done. And I'll see you in the next lesson.